It moves around us, within us, and through everything we touch, yet we can never see it, never hold it, never slow it down. It is the quiet river that carries empires, dreams, and civilizations downstream, unstoppable, indifferent, eternal. Before clocks, before calendars, before the word hour even existed, our ancestors stood beneath vast skies and wondered, what is this thing that passes, that changes everything but can never be touched? They watched shadows stretch and vanish, saw the stars drift across the heavens, and began to sense a pattern, a rhythm hidden in the universe. For most of human history, time wasn't a number. It was a story. It was the story of dawns and harvests, of births and seasons, of the stars returning home after long journeys across the night sky. To measure time was not merely to track minutes and hours. It was to understand the heartbeat of the cosmos itself. In this story, we'll travel through that river, from the first marks carved on bone to the atomic precision of modern physics. We'll see how humanity learned to tame something invisible, and in doing so, learned to order its own existence. This is the story of time, of how we learn to measure the infinite. Welcome to History for Sleep, where the past drifts softly into dreams. Do not forget to write out in the comments where you are listening from. I'd love to know in which places around the world I am helping people sleep even more soundly. Plus, if you like what I do here, subscribe now and let tomorrow's dream begin where this one ends. Chapter 1: Before the Clock, The Origins of Timekeeping. Long before calendars, before civilizations rose from dust, there were shadows. Imagine standing in a prehistoric valley, 40,000 years ago. The world is raw and silent, the air heavy with the scent of pine and fire. A group of early humans gather near a cave entrance. One of them, perhaps out of curiosity or ritual, picks up a bone and scratches a series of marks along its edge, 28 notches, evenly spaced. The bone, later discovered in the Congo, would become known as the Ishango bone. It's one of the oldest artifacts in human history, believed to represent the passage of days, a lunar calendar in bone form. To those first timekeepers, the moon was everything. Its waxing and waning gave rhythm to the world, a measure of fertility, migration, and ritual. Each phase marked a pulse in nature's slow heartbeat. When humanity became farmers, time changed meaning. The Neolithic Revolution, around 10,000 BCE, turned nomads into settlers, and survival began to depend on knowing when to plant and when to reap. The sky became a book, and humans began to read it. They noticed that the stars returned in cycles, that the sun rose slightly further north each day until it paused, then drifted south again. The solstices and equinoxes became sacred markers, the earliest calendars. One of the oldest observatories ever discovered lies in the grasslands of modern Ukraine, the Archeim Circle, dating back to around 2000 BCE. Here, massive concentric walls aligned perfectly with sunrise and sunset during solstices. Even more ancient is Nabta Playa, deep in the Egyptian desert. Stone circles that predate Stonehenge by 1,000 years, aligned with the rising of specific stars. These were not merely structures, they were instruments, giant clocks of stone and shadow. And then came Stonehenge. Built between 3000 and 2000 BCE, it wasn't only a monument to mystery, it was a timekeeper of the heavens. On midsummer's dawn, the sun rises precisely over the heel stone, flooding the inner circle with light. On midwinter's sunset, it sinks directly behind another alignment. To those ancient builders, this was more than astronomy. It was magic, religion, and science merged into one. To measure time, was to speak the language of the gods. In Mesopotamia, humanity's first cities rose from the mud of the Tigris and Euphrates. The Sumerians divided the circle and time into 60 parts, a system that survives to this day in our minutes and seconds. They built shadow clocks, obelisks that told time through the movement of shadows, and water clocks, called clepsydrae, which measured the flow of time by the steady drip of water. In ancient Egypt, time was sacred and practical. The Egyptians divided the day into 12 daylight hours and the night into 12 hours of darkness, adjusting the length of each hour according to the season. They measured hours not in minutes, but in how long the sun took to cross between temple columns, or how water levels dropped in a bowl. For the Egyptians, time wasn't linear, it was cyclical. Each day the sun god Ra was born at dawn, sailed across the sky, died at sunset, and journeyed through the underworld before rising again. To live was to join in that eternal rhythm, and in that idea of a universe that dies and is reborn endlessly lies one of the oldest philosophical ideas of time itself. Across the world, others shared this sense of eternal rhythm. The Mayans charted time with staggering precision, creating a calendar spanning thousands of years, tracking the movements of Venus and the cycles of eclipses. The Chinese, during the Xia and Shang dynasties, recorded solar and lunar eclipses on oracle bones. The Babylonians tracked the heavens with mathematics that would lay the foundation for astronomy itself. But even then, there was no clock. Time was not counted by machines but felt through nature. The moon's glow, the stars' return, the sun's path. It was both cosmic and human, an unseen companion moving alongside every birth, every harvest, every prayer. By the time civilization reached its first great flowering in Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, and China, humanity had already begun to measure the infinite, not yet with gears or glass, but with shadows, stones, and stars. Chapter 2. The First Clocks, Shadows, Water, and Fire. By 1500 BCE, the human relationship with time was no longer a mystery whispered by the sky. It was a tool, and those who could measure it held power. The Egyptians, always innovators, refined the shadow clock into something more portable. They built sundials that divided daylight into measurable hours, marking progress with the shifting of shadows across carved lines. Yet the sun's light was fickle, clouds, nightfall, and winter rendered the device useless. The need for constancy gave rise to one of history's most elegant inventions, the water clock. The earliest water clocks appeared in Babylon and Egypt, later spreading to Greece and China. Known as clepsydrae, they were bowls or jars with small holes that allowed water to drip at a steady pace. In the courts of Thebes and Babylon, priests used them to time rituals, astronomers used them to observe celestial events, and judges used them to limit the speeches of orators. One of the most sophisticated early versions came from ancient Greece around the 4th century BCE. Greek engineers added floating indicators, intricate markings, and later, even mechanical features that sounded alarms or opened doors when the water reached a certain level. Early prototypes of automation, centuries before the industrial age. Yet even these devices were imperfect. Water evaporated, froze, or flowed inconsistently, so humanity turned to fire. In China, by 500 BCE, timekeeping evolved in a new direction: incense clocks and oil lamps. Each stick of incense burned for a known duration, often with colored threads that dropped small bells as the flame reached them. The air itself became an instrument of time, fragrant smoke marking the passage of moments. In India, Sacred texts like the Vedas described Gatika yantras, water clocks used to measure the intervals of prayer and ritual. Meanwhile, in Greece, philosophers began to connect time to motion and change. Aristotle described time as the number of motion in respect of before and after. It was a profound realization. Time was not a separate thing but a way of perceiving change. While the Greeks sought to understand time's essence, others sought to control it. In the Hellenistic world, inventors like Ctesibius of Alexandria built astonishing mechanical devices. His water clocks not only measured hours, but displayed the position of celestial bodies and automatically reset themselves daily. These were not mere instruments. They were performances of cosmic order. By the 1st century BCE, Romans had installed public sundials across their cities, not for science, but for empire. Timekeeping had become a symbol of authority. The bell that marked an hour in the Roman Forum told every citizen who truly ruled their day. But in Rome's shadow, something deeper was changing, a shift from the cyclical to the linear. The philosophers of the early Christian era, influenced by Jewish thought, began to view time as a one-way journey, a story moving from creation to judgment, from beginning to end. It was a radical shift that would shape Western time forever. From fire and shadow to sand and stone, humanity had begun to confine the infinite. The age of simple elements was giving way to the age of mechanism, and soon the ticking heart of time itself would be forged from iron. Chapter 3: The Mechanical Revolution, when time found its voice. In the cold stone towers of medieval Europe, something extraordinary began to echo, a sound the world had never heard before, a rhythmic tick, steady and eternal, cutting through the silence of the cloistered night. For the first time, time had a voice. By the 13th century, Europe was transforming. Cathedrals rose toward heaven, universities flourished, and cities pulsed with trade. Life was becoming ordered, measured, and the need to divide the day precisely was no longer just for farmers or priests. The monasteries of Christendom became the first laboratories of time. Monks had long measured their days by bells, matins before dawn, vespers at sunset, compline at night. But as monasteries grew in wealth and discipline, a new problem emerged: human fallibility. The ringing of bells by hand was inconsistent, and prayer required precision. Somewhere, perhaps in the quiet workshops of northern Italy or England, a monk engineer began experimenting with a system of weights, pulleys, and gears. These were the first mechanical clocks, built not to tell the time of day, but to mark the rhythm of devotion. The earliest known example appeared around 1280, a massive, gear-driven contraption installed in a church tower. It had no dial, no hands, only a bell that struck the hours. The gears were turned by falling weights, regulated by a device that changed the world: the escapement mechanism. Before the escapement, time was continuous, a flow like water. The escapement changed that. It broke time into beats, controlled intervals, like the human heart. Each swing of the mechanism released a tooth of the gear, producing a pulse. For the first time, time became not just a concept, but a series of precise, measurable moments. By the early 1300s, great cities competed to build grand public clocks. Milan, Paris, and London all installed massive mechanical timepieces in their towers. These were monuments not only to craftsmanship but to a new idea: that time could be owned, shared, and displayed. The Salisbury Cathedral clock, built around 1386, is one of the oldest surviving examples. Constructed entirely of iron and gear-driven, it had no face, only a bell to sound the hours. Its chime was the heartbeat of the city. In the following century, clockmakers became artists of precision. The astronomical clocks of Prague, Strasbourg, and Lund were marvels of both engineering and imagination. The Prague astronomical clock, built in 1410, not only told the time but displayed the movement of the sun and moon, the zodiac, and even the position of celestial bodies. To stand beneath it was to see the universe turning in harmony. But the mechanical clock did more than track hours. It reshaped humanity's sense of life itself. Before its invention, time was local, fluid, tied to nature. Now it became fixed, urban, and industrial. People began to speak of keeping time, of managing it, wasting it, saving it. The clock transformed time from a natural rhythm into a commodity. Philosophers of the age noticed this shift. The 14th century scholar Nicole Oresme described the clock as a machine that imitates the movement of the heavens. But in imitation came domination. Humanity was no longer guided by the cosmos. It was beginning to command it. By the Renaissance, mechanical clocks were everywhere. In palaces, universities, and merchant halls. The design spread eastward to the Islamic world and China, where scholars and engineers adapted it to their own traditions of astronomy and art. The famed polymath Al-Jazari, in the early 13th century, had already described intricate water-driven automata and timepieces that combined science and beauty. His influence bridged cultures, linking the mechanical innovations of the East and West. Yet for all their precision, these early clocks still lacked a key element: portability. A clock that could travel, that could measure time beyond the tower. That invention would belong to the Age of Discovery. Chapter 4: The Age of Exploration, when time mapped the world. As the 15th century dawned, humanity's gaze turned outward. Ships began to cut across oceans once feared impassable, and nations vied to chart the unknown. Time, once sacred, then mechanical, was about to become global. At sea, time wasn't just for convenience, it was for survival. To navigate, sailors needed to know not only the stars above, but the time at a fixed reference, their home port. Latitude could be found by measuring the sun's height or the angle of Polaris. But longitude, the east-west position on Earth, required knowing the difference between local time and reference time. Every hour of difference equaled 15 degrees of longitude. Without accurate time, sailors wandered blind, hundreds of miles off course. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, explorers like Magellan, Cook, and Drake carried rudimentary sand glasses and unreliable mechanical clocks. The ocean's humidity and the ship's rolling made pendulums useless. Maps warped, ships disappeared, and empires lost fortunes to the chaos of uncertain time. The problem became so dire that governments began offering vast rewards. In 1714, the British Parliament announced the Longitude Act, promising £20,000, millions in today's currency, to anyone who could devise a method to determine longitude accurately at sea. The challenge would take decades and a quiet genius to solve. That genius was John Harrison, a humble carpenter from Yorkshire. He had never attended university, but his obsession with precision drove him to create a new kind of clock, one that could resist the sea's violence. Over 40 years, Harrison designed and built a series of marine chronometers that defied the odds. His fourth design, H4, was a masterpiece, a handheld clock so accurate that it lost less than a second per day, even on stormy voyages. It looked more like a pocket watch than a machine of the empire, but it changed navigation forever. With Harrison's invention, sailors could at last measure the world. Longitude could be calculated precisely. The Earth itself became a clock face, each meridian another division of time. Global trade accelerated, empires expanded. The age of exploration became the age of synchronization. But while ships crossed oceans, scholars and astronomers were refining time on land. At the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, established in 1675, scientists charted the heavens to define a standard reference, Greenwich Mean Time, GMT. The prime meridian, the line of zero longitude, ran through its observatory, marking the point from which all global time would one day be measured. Elsewhere, the pendulum clock, invented by Christian Huygens in 1656, revolutionized accuracy. The steady swing of the pendulum, each beat identical, reduced errors to less than a minute per day, unimaginable precision for its era. In the homes of the wealthy, the grandfather clock became a symbol of order and prosperity, its steady tick a comfort and a command. Meanwhile, in Asia, China's Ming Dynasty scientists built elaborate astronomical devices to track celestial cycles. The water-powered armillary spheres and timekeeping towers of Susong in the 11th century were revived and improved, showing that the mastery of time was never bound to one civilization. The dialogue between East and West in measuring the cosmos spanned continents and centuries. As clocks grew more accurate, the world began to shrink. For the first time, people could coordinate meetings, departures, and prayers separated by miles. The 18th century became obsessed with precision. The Age of Enlightenment itself was a quest to measure, reason, and order. Philosophers spoke of time as a universal constant, an invisible thread uniting all experience. Isaac Newton called it absolute, true, and mathematical. Time was no longer divine or local. It had become scientific. Yet in the quiet of that realization, a paradox emerged. The more accurately we measured time, the more aware we became of its passage. Every second gained in precision reminded humanity of what it could never regain. The seconds lost. The world had become measurable, yes, but also finite. Chapter 5. The Industrial Revolution, when humanity became the clock. The 18th and 19th centuries changed everything. Steam, iron, and invention transformed the quiet rhythm of the old world into the relentless pulse of industry. For the first time, human life no longer followed the sun. It followed the clock. Before the factories came, time was still local and flexible. Farmers rose with dawn, rested with dusk, and measured their days by the turning of seasons. The rhythm of the earth still guided the rhythm of life. But with the Industrial Revolution, that rhythm was broken and rebuilt, forged in iron and regulated by whistles. In the new industrial cities of Britain, Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, great textile mills and steel foundries filled the air with smoke and steam. Inside them, time was everything. Workers were paid by the hour, machines ran on schedules, and production depended on precision. A few minutes' delay could mean the loss of profit, or worse, the shutdown of an entire assembly line. The factory bell replaced the village church bell. It was not a call to prayer. It was a summons to labor. Workers adjusted their lives around its command. Rise at 5, arrive by 6, work until dusk. Children, too, learned early the meaning of punctuality. Time was no longer an invisible current. It was a master. This transformation wasn't only mechanical. It was psychological. In earlier centuries, to be late was a small thing. Now it was a moral failure. Time is money, wrote Benjamin Franklin. a phrase that became gospel in the new industrial age. The measure of a man was no longer his harvest, his craft, or his faith, but his efficiency, how tightly he could fit his life within the boundaries of the clock. Factories relied on new timekeeping devices, regulator clocks, precise and standardized. These were no ornate ornaments. They were instruments of control, mounted high on factory walls, ticking with impersonal exactitude. In cities like Birmingham, watchmakers and engineers refined gears, springs, and escapements until watches became small enough to fit inside a waistcoat pocket. The pocket watch became the badge of modernity, a symbol of respectability and discipline. Railways soon magnified this obsession with precision. In 1825, the world's first public railway opened between Stockton and Darlington, England. Within decades, rail lines spread like veins across Europe and America. Trains connected towns that once lived in separate times. Literally, before railways, each city kept its own local solar time. Noon in Bristol could differ from noon in London by several minutes, but trains demanded order. Schedules had to be exact. A few minutes of difference could cause disaster. Thus was born railway time, the first standardized time in history. In 1847, the Great Western Railway adopted London's time across its network. Soon, all of Britain followed. The rest of the world would not be far behind. The 19th century saw humanity synchronize like never before. Telegraph lines stretched across continents, allowing messages and time signals to travel faster than any ship or horse. For the first time, people could coordinate across distances. Factories, schools, post offices, and even households adjusted their clocks by telegraph transmitted time signals sent from observatories. The new century belonged to mechanical precision, but something profound had changed in the human soul. Time, once sacred, once a partner in life, had become an overseer. The factory worker no longer watched the sky, he watched the clock. The poet of the industrial age, Charles Dickens, described time as the grim old clock that never stopped. It was progress, but it was also a chain. Yet even in this new world of steel and smoke, there was awe. The idea that humanity could synchronize across cities, nations, and oceans felt almost divine. The world, once vast and fragmented, was beginning to tick as one. Chapter 6. The Birth of Global Time. From Railways to Time Zones. By the late 1800s, the world had shrunk to the size of a clock face. Telegraphs and steamships had knit distant nations together, but their timekeeping was chaos. A traveler crossing the United States in 1870 had to adjust his watch dozens of times, each city living by its own sun. Railways, shipping lines, and the growing global economy demanded harmony. Time had to become universal. In Britain, the Royal Observatory at Greenwich had already become the center of astronomical measurement. Since 1675, it had provided the reference point for navigation, its meridian line marking zero longitude. By the 19th century, this line had become the heart of a new concept, Greenwich Mean Time. At first, GMT was simply an astronomer's tool. But as telegraph networks expanded, observatories began sending time signals across the world. In 1852, the first public time signal was transmitted from Greenwich, a rhythmic pulse sent via telegraph wires to clocks in London, Liverpool, and ports across the empire. It was revolutionary. Now, ships could synchronize their marine chronometers before setting sail. Factories and railways could coordinate. Even ordinary citizens could purchase clocks calibrated to the same celestial beat. Across the Atlantic, however, the problem was greater. The United States, with its vast railways, suffered from utter temporal anarchy. By the 1880s, there were over 300 local times in operation. A train leaving Chicago might pass through a dozen noons before reaching New York. Accidents became common, timetables impossible. It was the railroad companies, not governments, that finally forced change. In 1883, American railway executives gathered in Chicago and agreed to divide the continent into 4 time zones: Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific, each differing by 1 hour. At noon on November 18, 1883, the nation's clocks were reset in unison. It was called the Day of Two Noons. 1 year later, representatives from 26 nations met in Washington, D.C. for the International Meridian Conference. They agreed to adopt Greenwich as the prime meridian, 0 degrees longitude, and to divide the world into 24 time zones of 15 degrees each. For the first time in history, Earth itself became a synchronized system. The implications were immense. Commerce, communication, and science all accelerated. Time zones allowed international trade to flow smoothly and navigation to become exact. Telegraph cables carried daily time pulses from Greenwich across oceans, ensuring ships and cities aligned with a single rhythm, humanity's first truly global heartbeat. But global time also created new tensions. It was, after all, a human invention, an attempt to impose order upon nature's fluidity. Not everyone welcomed the change. Farmers and rural communities resisted the clock, preferring the timeless rhythms of dawn and dusk. Philosophers worried that mechanical precision was robbing life of spontaneity. "We no longer live in time," wrote one critic. "We live by it." By the dawn of the 20th century, time had become both a tool and a tyranny. Factories operated with whistles that blew on the hour. Schools opened and closed by the bell. Trains departed not when the sun said so, but when the timetable commanded. And yet, beneath all this structure, humanity's ancient wonder remained. Astronomers at Greenwich still charted the heavens, tracking tiny variations in the Earth's rotation. Sailors still measured stars against the horizon. Even the most industrial of cities paused for a moment each day when the clock struck noon, as if honoring time itself. The synchronization of the world was one of humanity's greatest achievements, a triumph of intellect and cooperation. But it also marked a quiet loss, the fading of the personal, local, natural time that had once guided our ancestors. The river of time still flowed as it always had, but humanity now floated upon it in unison, each of us bound to the same invisible current. Chapter 7: Einstein and the Elastic Universe When Time Lost Its Chains. By the dawn of the 20th century, the world's clocks ticked in unison. Every train, every factory whistle, every telegraph pulse followed the same beat. Humanity had conquered time, or so it believed. But far from the clamor of cities, a quiet thinker in a small Swiss patent office was about to dismantle that certainty. His name was Albert Einstein, and his ideas would prove that time, the very fabric humanity had tried so hard to regulate, was not what anyone thought it was. For centuries, time had been assumed absolute. From Isaac Newton's view, time flowed uniformly, absolute, true, and mathematical, as he wrote, unaffected by motion, gravity, or perspective. It was the stage upon which all events played out, unmoving and eternal. But the universe, it turned out, had other plans. Einstein began his work not by studying time, but light. In 1905, his special theory of relativity shattered the Newtonian world. He proposed that the speed of light was constant, unchanging, no matter how fast an observer moved. To preserve that constancy, space and time themselves had to stretch and bend. Suddenly, time was relative. The faster one moved, the slower time passed. A moving clock would tick more slowly than a stationary one, not because of mechanical error, but because time itself dilated. It was a revelation as profound as anything humanity had ever learned. Two observers, moving differently, would experience different realities of time, both equally valid. The idea seemed impossible, yet experiment after experiment confirmed it. Einstein's insights deepened a decade later, with his general theory of relativity 1915. Here, gravity and time became inseparable. Massive objects, stars, planets, even the Earth, warped the fabric of space-time itself. Time slowed in stronger gravitational fields and accelerated in weaker ones. Clocks on mountaintops ticked ever so slightly faster than those at sea level. In the vastness of the cosmos, time became a flexible dimension, not a river flowing steadily, but a fabric that curved and stretched. The implications were staggering. Time, once thought of as a human invention, was revealed to be a property of the universe itself, something that could bend, ripple, and even break. The cosmos was not a clockwork machine after all, but a symphony of motion and distortion, played across the fabric of space-time. And yet, even as physicists rewrote the laws of the universe, ordinary life marched on, ruled by the mechanical tick. Factories still ran by schedules, trains still kept to Greenwich time. Einstein's revelations, though revolutionary, existed in a realm of mathematics and starlight, far removed from the daily lives of people. But as the 20th century advanced, relativity would quietly seep into everyday existence. Astronomers corrected for gravitational time shifts when observing distant galaxies. Pilots noticed the tiny but measurable effects of time dilation at high speeds, and later, satellites orbiting the Earth would rely on Einstein's equations simply to function. The ancient question, "What is time?" had evolved from philosophy into physics. It was no longer a simple, measurable quantity. It was a dimension of existence, intertwined with the shape and fate of the cosmos. Time had escaped our control, and yet humanity's urge to measure it only grew stronger. Chapter 8: The Atomic Age, Counting the Uncountable. By the mid-20th century, the ticking of pendulums and gears was no longer enough. The world had become faster. Jets sliced across continents. Computers performed calculations in microseconds, and science demanded measurements precise to billionths of a second. The mechanical age gave way to the atomic age. In 1949, scientists at the U.S. National Bureau of Standards unveiled the first atomic clock. Instead of gears or pendulums, it used the vibrations of atoms, specifically the cesium-133 isotope, to mark time. Each cesium atom vibrated 9,192,631,770 times per second, with astonishing regularity. This became the new definition of the second, replacing the ancient astronomical measure of Earth's rotation. No pendulum, no quartz crystal, no celestial body could rival its precision. If an atomic clock had begun ticking at the birth of the universe over 13 billion years ago, it would be off by less than a single second today. This breakthrough redefined every concept of precision humanity had ever known. Navigation systems, scientific experiments, and telecommunications all began to depend on atomic time. The clock had transcended its earthly origins. It had become cosmic. time in orbit. As satellites began to circle the Earth, atomic clocks became their hearts. In the 1970s, the Global Positioning System (GPS) emerged, relying on signals from multiple satellites, each synchronized by atomic clocks. These satellites constantly corrected for Einstein's relativistic effects. Time runs slightly faster in orbit, where gravity is weaker, and slower on Earth's surface. If these corrections were ignored, GPS errors would drift by kilometers every day. Our phones, our maps, our entire digital civilization rely on this invisible dance between relativity and atomic precision. The paradox of time deepened. We had never understood it less, yet never measured it better. Defining the present. As technology advanced, even the cesium standard became outdated. Physicists began experimenting with optical lattice clocks, using lasers and strontium atoms to achieve accuracy beyond imagination. These new clocks are so precise they would gain or lose less than 1 second in the lifetime of the universe. Timekeeping has reached a scale where the boundaries between seconds blur into quantum uncertainty. Scientists now debate whether the passage of time itself might emerge from deeper physical laws, or even from entanglement in quantum fields. Time, once counted by shadows and bells, is now measured by the trembling of matter itself, the world in sync. In the modern world, Coordinated Universal Time (UTC) replaced Greenwich Mean Time as the global standard. Maintained by hundreds of atomic clocks across the planet, UTC is corrected every few years by leap seconds to account for tiny irregularities in Earth's rotation. The same impulse that once guided priests in Egypt or monks in medieval towers now drives international committees to keep the heavens and humanity in harmony. From every smartphone to every spacecraft, every digital heartbeat of modern life is synchronized to atomic time. The old metaphors of time as river or circle have been replaced by code, precise, universal, unyielding. Yet beneath this perfection lies a haunting truth. No matter how finely we measure time, we cannot slow it. We cannot stop it. We can only follow it, as faithfully as the clocks we've built. The paradox of mastery. In conquering time, we have also become its servants. Our days are sliced into seconds, our lives into schedules. And yet, the more precisely we divide it, the more fleeting it feels. What began as humanity's attempt to understand eternity has become a mirror, showing us how fragile and finite we are. Einstein once said that the distinction between past, present, and future is only an illusion, however persistent. In the atomic age, that illusion has never been clearer or more necessary. For though time may be elastic, relative, and unfathomable, it remains the stage upon which all human stories unfold. And perhaps, in that endless measurement, in our longing to make sense of time, lies something timeless after all. Chapter 9. The Human Clock, Time in Culture and Memory. Even as science mastered time, humanity never stopped dreaming about it. For beyond the clocks, the atoms, and the stars, time lives within us, in the beating of hearts, in the stories we tell, and in the quiet way memory folds the past into the present. The cultural faces of time. In the West, time became linear, a road stretching from birth to death, creation to judgment. The Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, all taught of a beginning and an end, of history as a divine journey. This sense of forward motion shaped how the Western world lived. Progress, ambition, deadlines, destiny. Every second mattered, because every second was gone forever. But not all civilizations saw it this way. In the East, time was often circular, endless and renewing. In Hinduism, The universe moves through vast cycles called yugas, each billions of years long, repeating creation and destruction like a cosmic breath. In Buddhism, existence is an endless wheel of birth and rebirth, samsara, and enlightenment means escaping that cycle entirely. To ancient Chinese philosophers, time was harmony, not conquest. The Tao was not a path forward, but a balance, a constant return. And in many indigenous cultures, time was relational, not mechanical. The Australian Aboriginal dream time spoke not of past and present, but of layers, events existing together in the eternal now. The Maya saw cycles upon cycles. Their long count calendar spanned millennia, not years. For them, time wasn't linear or circular, but woven, a tapestry of patterns repeating at different scales. To live by such time was to live with patience, acceptance, and continuity. In contrast, the modern world, bound by clocks and calendars, lives in a perpetual chase. Each second is a task, each day a deadline. Our ancestors watched the stars. We watch the seconds tick away on glowing screens. The psychology of time. Modern science tells us that our perception of time is not fixed. It expands and contracts with emotion and memory. Fear makes seconds crawl. Joy makes hours vanish. The older we become, the faster time seems to pass, not because it does, but because novelty fades, and the brain records fewer moments. Children live in a world where every day is new. Adults live in one already mapped. The river of time runs at the same speed, but we no longer notice each ripple. Even language shapes how we experience time. English moves forward. We look ahead to the future and put the past behind us. But in Aymara, a language of the Andes, the future is behind because it cannot yet be seen while the past lies before, visible and known. For them, we walk backward into the unknown, facing only what has already happened. Culture, emotion, and memory all sculpt time into something deeply personal. There is no universal second in the human heart. Each person's clock beats differently, sometimes slow with sorrow, sometimes racing with love. We do not live in time, we live in moments. The philosophy of the now. Philosophers across centuries have struggled with a single question: what is the present? It seems so clear, yet the moment we try to hold it, it slips away. St. Augustine in the 4th century pondered, "What is time? If no one asks me, I know. If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I do not know." He understood what modern physics would one day echo, that the present is not fixed, but fleeting. For the mystics, the present was sacred. The Sufis spoke of waqt, the eternal moment, where the soul meets God. Zen masters taught that enlightenment is found not in the future, but in full awareness of the present. And in the writings of poets, time often dissolves completely. To Shakespeare, time was both destroyer and stage. We are time's subjects, and time bids be gone. In the hum of modern life, where hours vanish into the blur of routine, this ancient wisdom feels almost forgotten. Yet, in quiet moments, watching a sunrise, holding a child's hand, listening to rain, we rediscover it. The eternal moment. The now, a reminder that though time may move endlessly, life itself is lived only in the heartbeat of the present. Chapter 10. The Future of Time Beyond the Clock. Humanity has measured time by shadow and fire, water and gears, light and atoms. But the story is not over. A new chapter is unfolding, one that may change not just how we measure time, but how we experience it. The digital continuum. In the 21st century, time has become invisible again. buried inside machines, servers, and networks. Billions of digital devices now synchronized through the Internet of Time. An unseen lattice of atomic signals, GPS pulses, and quantum calibrations. Your phone, your watch, your bank, your heartbeat monitor, all ticking in harmony with the same cosmic rhythm. The world now runs on nanoseconds. Financial markets rise and fall in millionths of a second. Internet packets traverse oceans in less time than it takes to blink. To a computer, a human second is an eternity. Yet this precision has made us paradoxically timeless. In the digital realm, events do not truly end. Messages persist, data is archived, memories never fade. Time online is not linear, it loops endlessly, always retrievable, never quite gone. The Internet has created its own chronology, a world where everything happens now. The quantum frontier. Physicists are now probing time at its most fundamental level, the quantum realm, where reality itself flickers between possibilities. At this scale, time may not be continuous at all, but granular, composed of unimaginably small units, each lasting a mere Planck time, about 10% minus 43 seconds. Some theories suggest time might emerge from something deeper, the entanglement of particles, the relationships between events. Others propose that time might flow differently across the multiverse, or that it may not flow at all, that all moments, past and future, coexist in a vast, unchanging block. If true, our perception of time, of motion, change, becoming, might be only an illusion of consciousness, a trick of the mind evolved to navigate causality. In such a universe, nothing truly passes. Everything simply is, the mind beyond time. And what of us, the keepers of time? As neuroscience advances, it reveals how deeply time and mind intertwine. The brain doesn't perceive time passively, it creates it. Neurons fire in rhythmic patterns, building the sensation of flow. When we dream, these rhythms dissolve, seconds become hours, lifetimes unfold between heartbeats. The dreaming mind is timeless. As artificial intelligence evolves, new forms of awareness may perceive time differently, not as a linear stream, but as patterns, probabilities, or infinite feedback loops. AI could experience millions of subjective moments in a blink, or none at all. In teaching machines to keep time, we may have begun creating entities that live outside it, the return to eternity. And so the story of time circles back to its beginning. From lunar notches on bones to atomic oscillations, humanity has tried to capture what was never meant to be captured. Each advance has brought us closer to mastery, and further from mystery. Yet perhaps that mystery is what keeps us human, because time, for all our science, still slips through our fingers. It is in the laughter that fades, the warmth that cools, the heartbeat that slows, the day that ends. It is both our greatest creation and our greatest constraint. In the quiet of night, when clocks tick softly and the world sleeps, we may realize what our ancestors knew under the same stars, that time is not the enemy to be conquered, but the companion that walks beside us, unseen, unstoppable, eternal. And as you listen, as the moments drift gently by, perhaps you too can feel that rhythm, the same rhythm that guided the pharaohs, the sailors, the monks, and the dreamers, the rhythm of a universe that never truly stops, but forever, patiently flows. Part 2, Civilization and the Clock, How Time Built the Modern World. Time has always been our quiet companion. It whispered in the movements of the stars, in the cycles of the moon, in the shadows that stretched and faded with the sun. For thousands of years, humanity lived by these rhythms, patient, seasonal, eternal. Then, one day, the whisper began to tick. It began in the bell towers of medieval Europe, where monks built machines to call them to prayer. But those early gears, once set in motion, escaped the monastery walls. They found their way into town squares, into merchant halls, and finally into the beating heart of the modern world. The mechanical clock, once a servant of devotion, became a master of civilization. Its steady rhythm synchronized cities, armies, and empires. It shaped how we work, how we rest, how we live. It became not just a tool, but a philosophy, an invisible architecture of the modern mind. Before the clock, time belonged to nature. After the clock, time belonged to us, or so we thought. This is the story of how humanity built its world around the clock, and how, in doing so, the clock began to build humanity. It is a story of invention and obsession, of progress and control, of the human attempt to capture eternity within the gears of steel. It begins not in silence, but in smoke, under the factory roofs of the Industrial Revolution, where the heartbeat of civilization began to tick faster than ever before. Chapter 1: The Industrial Heartbeat. The dawn of the industrial age did not break with sunlight. It broke with the hiss of steam. In the early 18th century, the air above Britain was thick with smoke and ambition. Inventions that once served artisans now powered cities. Coal fed the engines of progress, and the rhythm of the machine became the rhythm of life. Before this, the average person lived by the clock of the sky. Farmers rose with dawn, worked with the sun's arc, and rested when it fell. Time was soft. It flexed with weather, with season, with circumstance. But the factory changed everything. Inside its walls, time hardened. No longer fluid, it became mechanical, broken into measurable, sellable pieces. The whistle that marked the beginning of a shift was more than a signal. It was a command. Men, women, and even children learned to obey the new master, the clock. Factories needed consistency. To keep thousands of machines moving in harmony, every worker had to perform with precision. And so the day was divided, not by hunger, light, or fatigue, but by hours, minutes, and seconds. The great iron machines did not tire, neither could those who served them. Industrialists understood what philosophers had only begun to grasp, that time was power. To control it was to control labor, production, and wealth. Every wasted minute meant a loss of output. Every second could be monetized. In this new world, time became currency, and punctuality became virtue. Benjamin Franklin's warning, "Time is money," echoed across continents. In Manchester, the hum of textile looms blended with the ticking of wall clocks. In Birmingham's foundries, molten metal flowed with the predictability of a second hand. Even the air itself seemed to pulse with measured regularity. But this efficiency came at a cost. The human body, long accustomed to the gentle rhythm of nature, now had to adapt to the mechanical cadence of industry. Sleep shortened, meals were scheduled, and daylight became irrelevant. Factory windows were often bricked up to prevent distraction. The only illumination came from lamps and flames, man-made suns, creating an artificial daytime. To the workers, time no longer flowed, it marched. The whistle at dawn tore through dreams, the one at dusk dismissed them. The old harmony between labor and rest had been replaced by a new kind of servitude to the clock. Even outside the factory, its influence grew. Merchants began keeping precise hours, schools and courts followed suit, Church bells, once marking prayer, now echoed the factory whistle. The city itself became a great machine, its people the moving parts. And yet, amid the clatter of looms and pistons, there was awe. For the first time, humanity could measure its own heartbeat, the pulse of progress itself. Every tick was a step forward, every chime a note in the grand symphony of invention. The mechanical clock had become a symbol of order, reason, and modernity, the perfect machine for an age that worshipped machines. But beneath the confidence of progress lay unease. Writers and poets began to feel the strain. Charles Dickens described time as the grim old clock that never stopped. Karl Marx warned that the factory had turned life into mere labor, reducing human experience to the measure of production. Still, no one could escape it. By the mid-19th century, factory time had become national time. The ticking of gears echoed from textile mills to train stations, from telegraph offices to classrooms. And with each passing year, the world ticked faster. The Industrial Revolution had created more than machines. It had created a new species of human, the time-bound individual. Every appointment, every meeting, every wage depended on precision. The rhythm of civilization had been set. Outside, the world still moved with the quiet patience of nature. Rivers flowed, seasons turned, stars wheeled overhead. But inside the walls of progress, humanity no longer lived by the stars. It lived by the tick. Chapter 2: Time as Power, Empire, and Colonial Control. By the middle of the 19th century, the mechanical clock had conquered the city. Its rhythm echoed in factories, offices, and train stations, but the reach of its tick was only beginning. For time, like power, expands to fill all it touches, and in the age of empire, the clock became a tool of control, silent, invisible, and absolute. The empire of hours. The British Empire at its height spanned nearly a quarter of the Earth's surface. Its railways, ships, and telegraphs connected millions of people who had never met, people who lived under different skies, spoke different tongues, and measured time by different suns. To govern such a world, Britain needed more than armies or maps. It needed order, a single heartbeat. That heartbeat was Greenwich Mean Time. Born in the Royal Observatory overlooking the Thames, Greenwich had once been an astronomer's refuge, a place where scientists charted stars and tides. But as the empire expanded, its observatory became something far more powerful, the 0 point of the world. From London to Bombay, from Cape Town to Hong Kong, time itself began to flow outward from a single line, the prime meridian. The choice was not simply scientific, it was political. Every empire claims the right to define reality, and the British Empire claimed the right to define time. Its clocks became the metronome of trade and administration. Telegraph cables carried the Greenwich pulse across oceans, and colonial railways adjusted their schedules to match the motherland's clock. In a sense, the sun never set on British time, the colonization of time. Before colonization, each region had its own temporal rhythm. In India, the day was divided into pahars, 8 parts linked to the position of the sun. In Africa, communities measured time by daily life, by the crowing of roosters, the ripening of fruit, the coming of rains. In the Pacific Islands, time was told by tides and the rising of constellations. But the empire brought the railway, and with it, the tyranny of punctuality. Stations required exact schedules. Telegraph operators synchronized by signal. Colonial governments issued decrees declaring official time zones for each territory, erasing centuries of local rhythm. In India, for example, Two major time standards emerged during British rule: Bombay time and Calcutta time, each tied to local solar noon. When the railways united them under Indian Standard Time, centered on Allahabad, fixed by Greenwich, millions had to reset their days. It was a quiet revolution, not of guns, but of minutes. The imposition of time zones symbolized something deeper: the reordering of existence. It turned local knowledge into inefficiency and human experience into schedules. The imperial clock didn't just measure work, it measured worth. The clock and the missionary. In the hands of missionaries, the clock took on another dimension: moral. Punctuality became a symbol of discipline, a mark of civilization. Mission schools and churches taught converts to keep time as a Christian virtue, contrasting it with what they called native idleness. A British missionary in the 1880s wrote from Africa that his greatest victory was not conversion, but the teaching of the clock. To arrive at prayer on the dot was to prove one's obedience, not only to faith, but to empire. In this way, the clock became a moral compass. It rewarded regularity, condemned rest, and transformed the daily act of living into a system of measurement. To control time was to control behavior, and to control behavior was to control people. Time as economic weapon. The rise of industrial capitalism extended the empire of hours even further. Plantations, mines, and shipping companies across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean relied on synchronized schedules to manage global labor networks. Workers were paid by the hour, not by the task. Managers enforced factory time with bells, whistles, and timesheets, instruments of compliance imported alongside Christianity and commerce. In ports like Singapore, Calcutta, and Cape Town, the sound of a clock tower was often the first noise to mark colonization. It was both a convenience and a declaration. This land now runs by our time. Yet beneath the iron discipline of the empire, local resistance persisted. In villages and farms, people continued to mark life by seasons and festivals. Many kept double time, one clock for the rulers, another for themselves. Festivals, prayers, and harvests still followed the old celestial order, a quiet rebellion against the empire's precision, the westernization of the world's time. By the late 19th century, European powers had extended their temporal systems to nearly every inhabited corner of the planet. French engineers brought Paris Mean Time to their colonies in North Africa. The Dutch imposed Amsterdam time on Indonesia. In East Asia, Japan, itself rapidly industrializing, adopted Western time zones to prove its modernity. When the International Meridian Conference convened in Washington in 1884, it formalized what the empire had already achieved in practice. Delegates from 26 nations voted to divide the world into 24 longitudinal time zones, all measured from Greenwich. Only the French resisted arguing for Paris, but the empire of hours had already chosen its center. The world had become a clock, the weight of the clock. By the early 20th century, nearly every human society had been drawn into the same temporal web. Telegraph cables pulsed in unison, railways thundered on schedule, and factories buzzed with regulated labor. The ancient diversity of time, solar, lunar, agricultural, sacred, had been flattened into a single rhythm, industrial modernity. But even as empires celebrated their precision, cracks appeared in the facade. Local traditions refused to disappear. Farmers ignored the whistle and planted by the moon. Villages rang their bells not on the hour, but when the community gathered. For all its reach, the empire of time could never fully erase the human heartbeat. Still, the damage, or the transformation, was done. The modern world now existed in shared time. Whether one lived in London or Lagos, Bombay or Buenos Aires, the same invisible pulse ordered the day. It was the most successful act of synchronization in history, achieved not by decree alone, but by the steady, unquestioned tick of the clock. And so, without conquest or rebellion, humanity entered the age of global time, an empire that outlasted every other, built not on land or blood, but with seconds. Chapter 3. The Railway Revolution, when distance learned to obey the clock. In the 19th century, the world suddenly began to move. Iron rails stretched across fields and mountains, slicing through distances that had once taken days to cross. The steam engine had conquered space, but the world was about to discover that conquering time was even harder. Before the railway, each town lived by its own clock. Noon in one city might be 12 minutes ahead or behind another. Every church spire, every clock tower marked the sun's position for its own people. There was no universal hour, only local rhythm. This worked well enough in the age of horses and sailing ships, but when the train arrived, it collided with chaos. The problem of many noons. Early railway travel was a bewildering experience. In the 1830s, a passenger leaving London might find their watch disagreed with the station clock at every stop along the route. Schedules were inconsistent, timetables impossible to coordinate. Trains collided because drivers followed different local times. Even in Britain, the world's most industrialized nation, the lack of standardized time threatened the entire system. The railway, more than any other invention, demanded precision. Steel wheels turned to schedules, not seasons. Passengers depended on synchronized departures. Cargo depended on arrival on the dot. The train's power lay not only in speed, but in its ability to promise when, not just where, it would be. Thus began one of the quietest revolutions in history, the standardization of time, the birth of railway time. In 1840, the Great Western Railway, linking London and Bristol, made a radical decision. It adopted London time, measured from the Royal Observatory at Greenwich, across its entire network. This meant that hundreds of miles of countryside, dozens of towns, and thousands of people now followed a clock set by astronomers hundreds of kilometers away. At first, passengers complained. Local mayors protested. Why should Bristol surrender its own noon to London's? But practicality triumphed. By 1847, most major railway companies in Britain had adopted Greenwich Mean Time. By the 1850s, the post office, telegraph operators, and eventually Parliament followed. Britain had synchronized itself, not by law, but by necessity. The country now moved to the rhythm of the machine. The shift wasn't just logistical, it was psychological. The traveler no longer saw time as local or natural. The clock on the wall, not the position of the sun, told them where they were and when. The age of personal time was over. The age of network time had begun. The telegraph and the global pulse. But the railway's true power came when it met another invention, the telegraph. The telegraph annihilated distance. Messages that once took weeks could now cross continents in seconds. A single electric pulse could reset clocks in entire cities. By the 1860s, telegraph lines paralleled the railways, transmitting time signals from observatories to every major station. At noon each day, a coded electrical signal flashed across the empire, synchronizing hundreds of clocks at once. The world was beginning to tick as one. In 1852, the first official Greenwich time signal was transmitted from the Royal Observatory. The same observatory that once charted the heavens now ruled the world below. Its invisible heartbeat pulsed across the wires, through London, through the ports, through the colonies. Time had become both mechanical and electrical, and increasingly political. The world becomes a schedule. By the 1870s, every major industrial nation faced the same dilemma. Railways, telegraphs, and commerce spanned vast territories. The United States alone stretched across more than 50 different local times. A train journey from Chicago to New York might cross a dozen noons. Confusion reigned. A conductor's pocket watch could determine the difference between life and catastrophe. It was the railways, not scientists, not governments, that forced the world into order. In 1883, American railway executives gathered in Chicago and established the standard time system. The continent would be divided into 4 time zones: Eastern, Central, Mountain, and Pacific, each exactly 1 hour apart. On November 18, 1883, the country synchronized. It became known as the Day of 2 Noons. In some towns, people watched as the clock struck 12 twice, once for the old local time, once for the new railway time. 1 year later, at the International Meridian Conference in Washington, 26 nations agreed to formalize the system. The world was divided into 24 time zones, each 15 degrees of longitude apart, measured from Greenwich. It was the first truly global consensus, an empire of cooperation built on seconds and degrees, time as the skeleton of civilization. The consequences were profound. With synchronized time, international trade flourished. Telegrams, newspapers, and shipping schedules now moved in harmony. Global communication became possible, not just because of electricity, but because the world now agreed on when now was. The railway's timetables became the first global system architecture, the prototype for every network that followed. Later technologies, telephones, airplanes, the internet, would all inherit this skeleton of synchronized time. But beyond economics and logistics, the railway reshaped human imagination. For the first time, distance could be expressed in hours, not miles. Paris was no longer far away. It was 6 hours from London. Time replaced geography as the measure of the world. The planet became smaller, not physically but perceptually, the human cost of precision. Yet precision, like progress, carries a shadow. The railway's relentless timetables demanded discipline from the human body and mind. Being late was no longer an inconvenience, it was a failure of character. Society began to prize punctuality, efficiency, and reliability, virtues born of the machine. The poet W.H. Auden would later write that the age of anxiety began when we started measuring ourselves against the clock. For in synchronizing the world, humanity had also synchronized its fears of delay, of waste, of time slipping away. Still, few could deny the miracle. The Iron Road had not only united continents, it had united time itself. Every station clock, every telegraph wire, every conductor's watch became part of a vast mechanism, a living, breathing world clock that never slept. The world that learned to arrive. By the turn of the 20th century, time had become the foundation of modern life. Factories ran by it, schools and armies drilled by it. Nations coordinated wars, parliaments, and telegraphs by it. It was no longer simply an invention. It was the architecture of civilization, and it all began with the train, the roaring, steaming, unstoppable messenger that taught the world how to arrive on time. The railway may have been made of iron, but its true gift was invisible, a rhythm that stretched across the globe, binding humanity in motion. Chapter 4. the age of punctuality, when being on time became a virtue. By the middle of the 19th century, the world had learned to run like a clock. The rhythms of factories and railways had fused into a single cultural heartbeat. But the ticking didn't stop at the factory gate. It entered the human mind. Time had ceased to be merely mechanical. It had become moral. To be punctual was now a matter of character. To be late was no longer an accident. It was a failing. And in this new creed of precision, societies everywhere began to measure virtue in minutes, the moralization of time. In the pre-industrial world, life's rhythm was communal. If a farmer arrived late to a harvest, the work began anyway. If a merchant missed a meeting, it could be rescheduled. Time was elastic because people were. But in the 1800s, the clock's authority hardened. Philosophers, preachers, and educators began to equate punctuality with morality and idleness with sin. Be not slothful in business, the book of Proverbs warned. In the industrial age, that verse became less about faith and more about factory discipline. Victorian sermons thundered about the virtues of industriousness. Punctuality was godliness, lateness, laziness. Children were taught that the good citizen, the moral man, was one who kept time faithfully. The clock became the conscience of civilization. Even literature echoed this sentiment. In Charles Dickens' world, respectable characters were those who rose early, labored diligently, and never wasted a second. In Samuel Smiles' best-selling 1859 book Self-Help, punctuality stood beside thrift, diligence, and sobriety as the pillars of progress. Timekeeping wasn't just an economic skill. It was a moral identity, education, and the discipline of time. Schools became the factories of punctual citizens. Bells rang not to mark hours of worship or celebration, but to drill obedience. Children lined up at exact intervals, marched to lessons, and learned to measure their worth in grades and attendance. The timetable, once a simple organizer, became a tool of psychological training. Teachers enforced schedules to the minute. Latecomers were punished, not for the disruption, but for the sin of tardiness. In this world, time was no longer shared. It was owned. Each child was made to guard it jealously, to budget it like money. This education extended beyond the classroom. Manuals of etiquette taught that arriving a minute late for dinner insulted the host. Business guides insisted that punctuality is the soul of success. Even courtship followed the clock. A gentleman's promptness proved his integrity, a lady's punctual appearance, her virtue. By the late Victorian period, the clock was not just an instrument, it was an ideal, religion, and the sanctity of schedule. Ironically, the clock that once served monasteries now disciplined the faithful in a different way. In Protestant Europe, time took on an almost spiritual weight. The so-called Protestant work ethic taught that diligence and time management were signs of divine favor. To waste time was to squander a gift from God. John Wesley, founder of Methodism, warned his followers to redeem the time, to fill every hour with productive purpose. Church bells rang with military precision. Sunday services started at exact minutes. For the first time, worship itself was timed. Meanwhile, missionaries abroad spread not only faith, but punctuality. They taught new converts to attend prayers on time, using the clock as a moral tutor. In Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, the first European-built structures were often not churches or schools, but clock towers, symbols of both faith and control. Religion, industry, and empire had found a common rhythm. Time was no longer the measure of the universe. It was the measure of the soul, the virtue of efficiency. The late 19th century adored efficiency. Engineers calculated output to the minute. Businessmen scheduled their lives like rail timetables. Cities became ecosystems of precision, synchronized bells, printed schedules, regulated meals, standardized office hours. Magazines like the Engineer and Scientific American published essays on time discipline. Factories adopted timesheets to track every task. Clerks filled ledgers with the hours spent on each transaction. This wasn't simply management. It was a new form of morality, a faith in numbers. A new kind of hero emerged, the efficient man. He was punctual, organized, restrained, a living embodiment of progress. In contrast stood his foil, the dreamer, the wanderer, the idler, condemned as a relic of a slower, lazier age. Even art was infected by punctuality. Painters, musicians, and writers began to think in terms of deadlines and productivity. The romantic image of the timeless artist gave way to the disciplined professional, the worker of beauty on schedule, the anxiety of the clock. But not everyone found peace in precision. As the century turned, poets and philosophers began to sense the psychological cost of a world bound by time. The German sociologist Georg Simmel observed that the modern individual had become a mere cog in the vast machine of punctual existence. Time, he said, had turned from servant to tyrant. Workers complained of exhaustion and monotony. The new 9-to-5 life reduced the day to predictable repetition. In factories and offices alike, people felt themselves dissolving into the machinery they served. Even leisure was timed. Lunch breaks, holidays, and weekends measured with the same discipline as labor. Freedom itself became another kind of schedule. The poet Matthew Arnold wrote, "We hurry all too fast. Our days are short and cheap." He saw what others dared not, that in worshiping the clock, society was losing touch with its own humanity. The watch in the pocket. By the 1880s, the pocket watch had become both a tool and totem. To own one was to be civilized. Factory owners gifted watches to loyal employees as rewards for service, miniature monuments to obedience. Railway conductors guarded theirs like sacred relics. For gentlemen, a chain and watch across the waistcoat was not just fashion, it was identity. To consult the watch was to locate oneself in the order of the world. It was an act of assurance, I am where I should be, when I should be, but it also chained the individual to a schedule they could no longer escape. When the novelist Thomas Hardy described a character hearing the thin pain tick of a watch, he captured that strange duality, comfort and confinement, discipline and despair. The watch was both a compass and cage, the legacy of the age of punctuality. By the dawn of the 20th century, punctuality had become second nature. It was no longer a virtue to be taught. It was the air society breathed. To be late was to be untrustworthy. To be idle was to be immoral. Children grew into adults who felt guilt at the mere idea of wasted time. And so, quietly, the human spirit adjusted to the rhythm of the clock. The same ticking that once echoed through monastery halls now pulsed in every home and heartbeat. Civilization had learned to keep time, but in doing so, it had also learned to fear it. For in the quest for perfect punctuality, humanity discovered something the clockmakers had never intended, that the more precisely we divide time, the more we feel it slipping away. Chapter 5. Leisure time and the birth of the weekend, when rest became a luxury. By the late 19th century, the world was spinning faster than ever before. Factories thundered, railways roared, telegraphs buzzed. The age of punctuality had given civilization its rhythm, precise, productive, relentless. But as the gears of progress turned, humanity began to long for something it had almost forgotten: rest. The paradox of progress. Industrialization promised prosperity, yet it demanded exhaustion. Workers toiled 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. In the textile mills of Manchester, the steelworks of Pittsburgh, and the shipyards of Glasgow, entire lives unfolded between whistles, a brief breakfast before dawn, a hurried supper at dusk, and sleep snatched like stolen treasure. The factory system had redefined labor, but it had also redefined fatigue. People who once rested by necessity, when the sun set, when the harvest ended, now worked in artificial daylight, for wages tied to the clock. Time was no longer shared between work and life. It belonged to the machine. But human bodies rebelled. They faltered, fainted, aged too soon. The relentless march of time could be endured, but not forever. And so, from the friction between exhaustion and progress, something revolutionary emerged. The idea that time could be returned to the worker. That leisure was not idleness, but humanity's right. The seeds of rest. The notion of rest was ancient. But in the industrial world, it became political. Religious leaders were the first to demand restraint. For centuries, the Sabbath had symbolized divine rest, a day when labor ceased and life regained balance. In the 1800s, reformers revived that moral claim. They argued that workers needed a day for the soul, not only for worship, but for sanity. The Sabbatarian movement, supported by churches and early labor groups, fought for Sunday closure laws, demanding that factories, shops, and railways pause 1 day a week. Employers resisted fiercely. Profit, they said, had no time for piety. But gradually, the movement gained ground. By the 1850s, Sunday rest had become common across much of Europe and North America. It was the first crack in the wall of industrial time, a single day that did not belong to the clock. The working-to-class struggle for leisure. The next battle was not moral, but social. The working class began to demand not just a day of worship, but a day of freedom. Saturday afternoons became the focus. In the industrial heartlands of England, workers petitioned for half-day Saturdays, arguing that a shortened workweek would improve health and morale. The idea spread like fire. By the 1870s, several industries, from printing to manufacturing, had begun to adopt it. Factories rang their last bell at noon, and workers poured into the streets to seize the hours they had earned. What did they do with this newfound time? They played, they drank, they gathered, sang, and built communities around leisure. Football clubs were founded by factory teams: Manchester United, Arsenal, Aston Villa, all born from those early half-holidays. Public parks filled with families. Music halls flourished. The same precision that had chained humanity to the clock now created a shared moment of escape from it. By the turn of the century, leisure had become a mass experience. Trains carried workers to seaside towns for day trips. Photographers captured families in striped bathing suits on windy beaches. The very railways that once enslaved time now delivered its freedom, in brief, golden doses. The birth of the weekend. By the early 20th century, the 2-day weekend began to take shape. The American labor movement pushed for shorter hours and fairer conditions. Unions coined slogans that echoed like prayer: 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours for what we will. In 1908, a New England cotton mill introduced the first known 5-day workweek, accommodating Jewish workers who observed the Saturday Sabbath. Others followed. By the 1920s, companies like Henry Ford's Ford Motor Company had adopted the model, not out of charity, but practicality. Ford discovered that rested workers were more productive, more loyal, and more likely to buy the very cars they built. And so, the modern weekend, 2 days of rest after 5 of labor, was born not from generosity, but from the marriage of compassion and capitalism. Rest had become efficient, the democratization of leisure. The early 20th century brought new ways to fill free time. Cinema, sports, and radio transformed leisure into an industry. Mass culture was born, and with it, the idea that time off could be spent not just in idleness, but in pleasure. In America, the Roaring '20s turned leisure into spectacle. Dance halls, baseball stadiums, and jazz clubs pulsed with rhythm and light. In Europe, the railways ferried crowds to the Riviera, to Paris, to Blackpool. Tourism became a ritual of modern life, the pilgrimage not of faith, but of recreation. The British philosopher Bertrand Russell would later observe, "The wise use of leisure is a product of civilization." It was a gentle reminder that free time, once fought for, required wisdom to fill, or it too could become another form of emptiness. The clock strikes at rest. Yet even in leisure, the clock's shadow lingered. Trains to the seaside ran on strict timetables. Factory sirens still marked the return to work. Even recreation became scheduled. The football match at 3, the cinema at 7, closing time at 11. Time had learned to disguise itself as freedom. The sociologist E.P. Thompson would later write that industrial capitalism had not only shaped work, it had shaped perception itself. The worker, he said, had internalized the clock. Even at rest, they felt the passing of time as a kind of debt. Relaxation measured against productivity. Leisure, in this sense, was not the opposite of labor. It was the reward for obedience to the system of time, a brief release from the precision it demanded. The weekend as a symbol, and yet for all its contradictions, the weekend remains one of humanity's quiet triumphs, a symbol of balance, of collective victory over relentless industry. In 2 short days, the world recovers its soul. Musicians perform, families gather, lovers rest. The factory still hums, the city still ticks, but for a while, life slows. Time, once conquered, is momentarily returned to those who built its empire. As the sun sets on Friday evening and the lights of the city flicker on, an ancient rhythm stirs beneath the asphalt, the same one that guided farmers and fishermen long before clocks ruled the sky. For 48 hours, humanity remembers what it means to live by its own time. Chapter 6: Time and War, the synchronized destruction of the modern age. The same precision that built factories and railways would soon march to war. As the 20th century dawned, humanity's mastery of time had reached perfection. Every second measured, every schedule synchronized. But in the trenches, in the skies, and in the laboratories of war, that mastery turned against its maker. The clock, once a symbol of order, became an instrument of destruction. The first mechanized war. In the summer of 1914, Europe's armies mobilized with mathematical precision. Train timetables dictated the movement of millions of soldiers. Generals spoke not of days or weeks, but of hours to mobilization, minutes to bombardment. The great powers believed that speed and coordination would bring victory. Instead, they brought catastrophe. The First World War was the most punctual war in history. Artillery barrages began at exactly scheduled times, synchronized across hundreds of miles of front. Each explosion followed another, like the ticking of a monstrous clock. Soldiers huddled in trenches, counting seconds between shells. For the first time, war itself had become mechanical, ruled not by chaos or courage, but by schedules and precision engineering. In the trenches, time stretched and collapsed. A minute could last an eternity, a week could vanish in mud and fear. Soldiers spoke of the long wait, endless hours of silence broken by seconds of terror. To keep their sanity, they measured days by rations, letters, and the nightly rhythm of gunfire. Time had become both their prison and their companion. The watch on the wrist. Before the war, wristwatches were considered feminine accessories. Men, especially officers, carried pocket watches, symbols of refinement. But in the chaos of battle, a watch chained to a vest was useless. Officers needed both hands free for maps, weapons, and survival. And so, soldiers began strapping their watches to their wrists with leather bands. The trench watch was born. It was rugged, luminous, reliable, designed for synchronization and survival. When the war ended, soldiers brought the habit home. The wristwatch became a badge of masculinity, precision, and modernity, a quiet souvenir of war's demand for punctuality. Every tick on those watches carried a shadow, a memory of countdowns, attacks, and orders measured in seconds. Chronometers of death. Time coordination defined every level of warfare. Battles began by the second. Bombers struck at planned intervals. Artillery units calibrated their fire with synchronized watches. Each soldier, in effect, became a gear in a vast killing machine. Every action timed, every movement recorded. On the home front, factory workers built weapons to the rhythm of shifts and bells. Propaganda posters urged civilians to save minutes, save lives. Efficiency was patriotism. Punctuality was victory. Every clock in every city ticked toward the same purpose: war without delay. Even death itself became scheduled. In 1918, the armistice that ended the Great War was signed at 5 a.m., but the ceasefire was set to begin at 11 a.m. Thousands died in those final 6 hours, killed between signatures and schedule. When the guns finally fell silent, the world realized how many lives had been ended with the mathematical accuracy of timekeeping. The Second War of Seconds. 2 decades later, the clocks of war began ticking again. This time, timekeeping itself had evolved. Radio waves transmitted global signals. Bombers and submarines are navigated by synchronized chronometers. Generals planned entire campaigns around timing precision measured in seconds. The Second World War was a battle of coordination, of convoys crossing oceans, planes striking in formation, and codebreakers racing against the clock. In Britain's Bletchley Park, cryptanalysts like Alan Turing used machines to measure patterns in time itself, deciphering the rhythm of the German Enigma machine. War had entered the realm of computation. In occupied Europe, resistance groups synchronized attacks to the hour. In the Pacific, the sun's position dictated bombings to the minute. And in 1945, in the deserts of New Mexico, scientists gathered at dawn to watch the clock count down to 0. They called it Trinity, the countdown. At 5:29 a.m. on July 16, 1945, humanity entered the atomic age. Physicists, soldiers, and generals stood in silence as the final seconds flashed on stopwatches. They had measured every factor: wind, distance, temperature, timing. When the second hand reached its mark, the world changed forever. The explosion lit the desert brighter than day. It was as though time itself had been frozen in light, a single infinite moment of creation and destruction. A few weeks later, 2 more countdowns ended over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The clocks there stopped at 8:15 and 11:02. Their frozen hands still stand today, silent witnesses to the minute humanity realized its mastery of time could end its own existence. The military clockwork. After the wars, the synchronization never stopped. The Cold War transformed punctuality into paranoia. Missile systems, radar networks, and nuclear silos operated on atomic timing. A delay of a few seconds could mean misinterpretation or annihilation. The world became a grid of countdowns, warning systems, and launch codes. The military's demand for accuracy drove the next leap in timekeeping: atomic clocks. Developed in the 1950s, they used the vibrations of cesium atoms to keep time within billionths of a second. The same precision that guided missiles would later guide satellites and GPS, tools of both warfare and peace. It was a bitter irony. The perfection of timekeeping, born in monasteries, perfected in factories, had reached its pinnacle through the science of destruction. Time and the human heart. For the soldiers who survived, war shattered time in subtler ways. In their memories, moments replayed endlessly. The second before an explosion, the minute of a friend's death, the hour a battle began. Trauma fractured their sense of continuity. They lived in recurring loops, haunted by events that never aged. Psychologists after the war called it shell shock, and later post-traumatic stress. But the ancient truth remained: time is not equal in the human mind. A single second of terror can last a lifetime, the legacy of synchronized destruction. In the 20th century, precision became the measure of power. Wars were no longer fought by men alone, but by machines of timing. Bombs that fell on the second, armies that moved to the minute, nations that lived by countdowns. The irony is inescapable. The clock, humanity's greatest tool for order, became its greatest weapon. Time, once tamed, now ruled with deadly perfection. And yet the same precision that made war possible also built peace. The atomic clock would give rise to the space age, to global navigation, to scientific wonder. But that too would be a story of paradox, of creation born from destruction, of seconds that could either save or end the world. Chapter 7: Atomic Time and Globalization, the New World Clock. By the middle of the 20th century, humanity had entered an age of unprecedented precision. The old mechanical clock, once the pinnacle of progress, had reached its limits. The gears that once ruled cities and empires could no longer keep pace with a world that moved at the speed of light. To manage the modern age, the world needed a new kind of time, one not measured by wheels and pendulums, but by the very fabric of the universe itself. The birth of atomic time. In 1949, at the U.S. National Bureau of Standards, a small group of scientists achieved what seemed impossible: a clock that never drifted. Rather than relying on mechanical motion, this new device measured the natural oscillation of cesium atoms, 9,192,631,770 vibrations per second. Each vibration was identical, immutable, eternal. This was the atomic clock, a timekeeper so precise that it would not lose a single second in millions of years. It redefined what a second even was. No longer tied to Earth's imperfect rotation, the second became a universal constant, the heartbeat of atoms themselves. Time, for the first time, had escaped the planet. The synchronization of the world. As the atomic age unfolded, nations realized that precision was power. Air travel, radio communication, and scientific research all depended on exact timing. In 1967, The International System of Units (SI) formally redefined the second using the cesium frequency. Greenwich still marked the world's zero longitude, but the true standard of time now lived inside laboratories, glowing cesium chambers humming with atomic rhythm. Soon these clocks began to network. The United States, Britain, France, Japan, and the Soviet Union established time laboratories that shared data by radio waves and later satellite. By the 1970s, dozens of atomic clocks were synchronized across the globe, creating a single, unified heartbeat. Coordinated Universal Time, UTC, became humanity's new prime meridian of existence. Every phone, plane, and computer would one day pulse to its rhythm. The world no longer merely kept time. It was time. The Invisible Empire. Unlike the clock towers of the empire or the factory bells of industry, atomic time was invisible. It existed in sealed laboratories, transmitted through cables, satellites, and invisible signals. Yet its reach was telecommunications, banking systems, flight navigation, television broadcasts, all began to depend on atomic precision. If the clocks drifted, the world would stutter. Financial markets could collapse, planes could miss their coordinates, digital systems could fail. Time had become infrastructure, silent, essential, unseen. Governments treated it as a matter of national security. During the Cold War, atomic clocks were guarded like weapons. The fear was not of someone stealing them, but of falling out of sync, because to fall out of time in the modern world was to fall out of power. The satellite revolution. In the 1970s, time took to the skies. The Global Positioning System, GPS, originally developed by the U.S. military, relied entirely on synchronized atomic clocks aboard satellites orbiting Earth. Each satellite carried several cesium and rubidium clocks, broadcasting time signals back to Earth. Receivers calculated location by comparing the time difference between multiple signals. Without perfect timing, GPS would fail instantly. If even a single clock were off by 1 microsecond, 1/1,000,000th of a second, your position would be wrong by 300 meters. If it drifted by 1,000th of a second, entire continents would shift. In this way, the Earth itself became a clock face, a living, breathing instrument of synchronized precision, its every point measurable in time. The globalization of the second. By the late 20th century, atomic time had woven itself into the fabric of globalization. The Internet, born from military networks and research universities, required synchronized timestamps to route data. Financial markets executed trades in microseconds, where a delay of a single millisecond could mean millions lost. Factories across continents, coordinated supply chains, air traffic control, power grids, digital encryption, all danced to the same rhythm. The world had never been more connected, nor more dependent on the invisible pulse of cesium. It was the triumph of precision, but also the birth of fragility. For when everything depends on time, everything becomes vulnerable to its slightest fracture, leap seconds, and the fragility of perfection. Yet even atomic clocks cannot escape the Earth's imperfection. Our planet's rotation, slowed by tides and shifting mass, occasionally drifts behind the atomic beat. To keep harmony between human time and celestial time, scientists invented a strange ritual, the leap second. Every few years, a single extra second is added to coordinated universal time. For one heartbeat, the world pauses. Computers hiccup, servers falter, and satellites adjust their orbit. It is a tiny correction, but a profound reminder that even the most perfect machine must occasionally bow to the old irregular rhythm of the cosmos, time as commodity. In the 21st century, time is no longer simply measured, it is bought and sold. Financial institutions pay for faster data transmission, cutting nanoseconds off transactions. Corporations build data centers beside atomic time stations to gain competitive advantage. An entire industry has arisen around latency, the measurement of delay. To be first is to profit, to lag is to lose. The second, once a philosophical mystery, has become currency, the unit of a new economy. Where once empires conquered space, now corporations conquer the human cost of global time. For ordinary life, the clock's total victory has brought both convenience and confinement. Flights, meetings, streaming videos, and phone calls occur seamlessly across oceans. But this unity has erased the gentle dissonance of local rhythms. There is no dawn or dusk in the global economy, only the unbroken hum of the network. We live increasingly in a 24-hour world, one that never sleeps, never slows, never stops. The atomic clock, designed to free us from inaccuracy, has instead enslaved us to precision. Every beep of a phone, every deadline, every digital tick is a small echo of the atomic pulse that governs all things. The same time that unites us also divides us, between those who command it and those who serve as a clock. And yet, in a strange twist of fate, our mastery of time has brought us full circle, back to the cosmos. Astronomers now use atomic clocks to measure the Earth's drift through space. Physicists study tiny variations in gravity by observing how time slows on mountaintops and speeds up at sea. The universe, it seems, keeps no constant time at all. Even now, in laboratories and satellites, the question remains, what is time really measuring? The more precisely we count it, the more mysterious it becomes. The world now moves not to the chime of a tower, but to the invisible vibration of atoms, a pulse so perfect, so constant, that it defines the boundaries of existence itself. We no longer watch the clock, we live inside it. The age of atomic time has made Earth a single synchronized machine, vast, fragile, and endlessly ticking. Chapter 8. The Digital Clock. Life in milliseconds. The hum of the digital age is not made of gears or steam. It hums in code, in invisible pulses that measure the heartbeat of the planet in billionths of a second. We have entered a time so precise, so fast, that it has become almost impossible to perceive. We live in the era of the digital clock, where time is no longer measured by us, but for us, by machines. The moment becomes the unit. In the old world, seconds were an afterthought. They existed for astronomers, navigators, and clockmakers, not for ordinary life. But in the digital age, the second is too long. Microseconds, milliseconds, even nanoseconds now define communication, computation, and commerce. Your smartphone synchronizes to atomic time dozens of times a day. Every email, every text message, every video call is stamped with invisible precision. 1,000 packets of data leave your device and arrive across the globe, each one labeled with a timestamp so accurate that even light itself, traveling through fiber, seems almost slow. We no longer ask what time is it. We assume the answer is always now. The Internet of time. In the late 20th century, when the Internet was young, it borrowed its rhythm from the same atomic clocks that guided satellites and military systems. The Network Time Protocol, NTP, became the hidden pulse of the digital world. Every server, router, and computer synchronized through it, listening to time signals cascading from atomic standards. It was a quiet marvel. Billions of devices scattered across continents, agreeing on the same second without ever meeting. Yet the more the world connected, the more impatient it became. Speed was no longer a luxury. It was survival. Web pages had to load in milliseconds. Financial trades executed in microseconds. Every delay was a loss. Every lag an imperfection. The world had become a race, not of distance, but of time itself, of speed. In the glass towers of global finance, time became money in the most literal sense. High-frequency trading firms built algorithms that could buy and sell thousands of times per second, not guided by humans but by the clock. To gain even a 1 millisecond advantage, corporations built their own private data cables under the Atlantic, running in straighter lines than the Earth's curvature. A millisecond, 1,000th of a second, could mean millions in profit or loss. The future wasn't predicted anymore. It was preempted by speed. This is the millisecond economy, where machines live in a reality faster than human thought. We created clocks so perfect they left us behind of instantaneity. But this race did not stay in stock markets. It reached the home. It reached the mind. The internet rewired human attention into smaller and smaller slices of time. Emails replaced letters. Tweets replaced essays. Notifications replaced conversations. Every moment became a miniature demand, a flash of urgency disguised as information. We learned to live inside intervals so brief that reflection itself began to feel like delay. The philosopher Hartmut Rosa calls this the acceleration of life, the endless compression of experience into fragments. We no longer measure life by years, but by updates. The digital pulse of the planet. Everywhere on Earth, the digital clock never sleeps. Servers hum in windowless data centers, cooled by ocean water and Arctic air. Satellites whisper timestamps to airplanes, ships, and phones. Even the rhythm of electricity, the frequency of the power grid, is measured and stabilized to the millisecond. It is an empire of precision without a king. No single person commands it. No single nation owns it. And yet, it governs all things. From the turning of traffic lights to the beating of pacemakers, from weather forecasts to online banking, the digital clock is the hidden sovereign of civilization. Its rule is silent, absolute, and uninterrupted. The disappearance of waiting. Waiting once gave shape to human experience. It created space for wonder, patience, and desire. The traveler waiting for a letter, the family waiting for news, the lover waiting for a meeting. But in the digital age, waiting has become unbearable. The smallest delay, a buffering video, a slow web page, sparks irritation. We are creatures born of patience, now allergic to it. This has changed how we live, work, and even love. Conversations unfold through instant messages. Relationships rise and fall through timestamps. The rhythm of human emotion has been recast in binary, online or offline, read or unread, now or never. We are no longer guided by the sun or the bell or even the wristwatch. We are guided by notifications, tiny flickers of time demanding attention, pulling us into perpetual reaction. The myth of real time. We speak now of real time, live streams, live markets, live feeds, but there is nothing real about it. What we call real time is an illusion created by latency so small we can no longer feel it. We live milliseconds behind reality, yet convinced we're watching it unfold. The world we see is always slightly delayed, a ghost of the present, rendered by machines faster than thought. Time itself has become an interface, a simulation of presence. When machines became the timekeepers. In this new era, machines don't just measure time, they create it. Algorithms schedule news feeds, optimize sleep cycles, predict traffic, and even time our conversations. Artificial intelligence systems forecast when we will act, buy, or respond, making decisions before we make them. The clock has become predictive, not reactive. We are no longer simply living in time. We are being lived through it. Our schedules are written by invisible systems that know our rhythms better than we do. And as machines grow faster, their sense of time drifts even further from ours. A neural network processes millions of decisions per second. To such a mind, our heartbeat is glacial, our minutes eternal. In creating digital time, we may have built a world no longer scaled to the human soul, the silence beneath the speed. And yet beneath the noise and the urgency, the world's time still flows as it always has. The earth still turns, the tides still pull, the stars still rise. The digital clock, for all its brilliance, only measures the smallest ripples on the surface of that endless river. Perhaps, in the stillness between notifications, in those fleeting, unmeasured moments, we can still hear the ancient rhythm that guided our ancestors, the breath, the heartbeat, the sunrise. Because even in a world that runs in milliseconds, the truest moments still live outside of time. Chapter 9. The Culture of Immediacy, When Everything Happens Now. There was a time when patience was a virtue, when journeys unfolded over months, letters took weeks, and waiting was part of the rhythm of being alive. But in the digital century, the idea of waiting has almost vanished. We live in a world where everything happens now, or feels as though it should. The great achievement of the human clock, its precision, its universality, its power to unite the planet, has transformed into a new condition, immediacy. A culture where every moment demands to be seen, shared, and responded to, instantly. The death of distance. The first stage of immediacy began with connection. When the telegraph was invented in the 19th century, people marveled that thought itself could travel at the speed of lightning. Now, every person carries a device that performs the same miracle, a network of billions of telegraphs compressed into a rectangle of glass. Time zones still exist, but in the digital world, they have lost their meaning. The internet does not sleep. It does not dawn or dusk. Messages fly from midnight to morning without pause. Work, love, politics, art, all coexist in the same eternal present. We are, as the sociologist Manuel Castells once said, living in a timeless time, a continuous stream of immediacy in which location, schedule, and sequence dissolve, the feed that never ends. Once, people experienced events, now they experience updates. News arrives not as a report of the past, but as an unfolding wave of the present, a scroll that never ends, where every headline competes for attention and every second brings something new to replace the last. In this landscape, the past evaporates almost as quickly as it happens. A post is born, seen, forgotten, all within the span of a heartbeat. The timeline has replaced the calendar. The feed has replaced memory. This is the paradox of immediacy. We know more than ever before, yet remember almost nothing at all. Information moves so fast that reflection cannot catch it. The present devours itself, leaving only the next refresh, the next notification, the next second, the speed of emotion. Immediacy has changed not only how we consume, but how we feel. Emotions once took time. They grew, simmered, healed. Now they ignite and fade in moments. We react before we understand, respond before we reflect. Social media rewards urgency. The faster the reaction, the greater the visibility. Anger spreads faster than reason. Excitement outruns patience. We have learned to feel in real time, but not to think in it. Our devices have become emotional clocks, each vibration a pulse of the global mood. 1 second, joy; the next, outrage; the next, exhaustion. The timeline beats faster than the human heart, the collapse of context. In the age of immediacy, everything happens at once. The ancient, the modern, the trivial, the profound, all coexist on the same glowing screen. A scientific discovery, a meme, a war, a recipe, each compressed into the same digital moment, stripped of hierarchy or duration. Time no longer unfolds, it stacks. Events pile upon events until the mind struggles to distinguish between what matters and what passes. The historian's timeline has become a web of simultaneity. In such a world, context itself becomes a luxury, something we no longer have time for. The instant dominates the enduring. The signal drowns the silence. Psychology of now. Neuroscientists have found that digital immediacy reshapes the brain's sense of time. Each alert and update releases a spark of dopamine, the same chemical that rewards pleasure and anticipation. We begin to crave the next ping, the next scroll, the next moment. Our minds, designed for patience, are reprogrammed for perpetual arrival. This addiction to now alters the rhythm of human experience. Concentration fragments. Sleep cycles distort. The quiet spaces in which thought once lived are filled with motion, glowing, buzzing, never still. To live in the culture of immediacy is to be constantly arriving, but never truly arrived. Art, creativity, and the vanishing moment. Even art, the oldest measure of reflection, has bowed to the pressure of the instant. Where once painters worked for years and composers for decades, now artists chase virality, a success measured not in permanence but in speed. Music drops, memes rise, trends fade, all in the span of days. Creation itself has become a race against irrelevance. Yet, within that acceleration, something remarkable persists. Humans continue to seek meaning in slowness, in films that unfold gently, in long novels, in the simple act of looking without swiping. It is as if our souls remember another tempo, one that no algorithm can erase. When everything is live, we live in a world where everything is broadcast, everything shared, everything archived. The ordinary moments that once vanished now linger forever online, frozen in servers and clouds. Ironically, our obsession with immediacy has produced permanence, a digital eternity in which nothing is ever fully gone. But permanence is not the same as memory. The internet remembers without feeling. It preserves everything, but understands nothing. And so we are surrounded by echoes of ourselves, moments we no longer inhabit, preserved by machines that never forget. The loneliness of the instant. In a world where everything happens now, silence feels like absence. We measure our worth in responses, in whether the world reacts quickly enough to remind us we exist. But this has left us curiously alone. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls it the tyranny of transparency, a life where everything is visible but nothing is shared. We exist together, yet apart, staring into synchronized moments that never truly connect. Immediacy has given us the illusion of presence, but often at the cost of intimacy. We have mastered connection, yet lost communion, the lost art of delay. To pause has become radical, to wait, subversive, but perhaps delay, that ancient rhythm of anticipation, is the only antidote to the tyranny of the now. Because in the stillness between seconds lies something the digital world cannot replicate. The slow bloom of meaning, the weight of reflection, the beauty of what takes time. A sunrise that cannot be sped up, a relationship that cannot be optimized, a thought that cannot be tweeted. Time, after all, was never meant to move at the speed of a signal. It was meant to be lived. In the culture of immediacy, we have gained the world in an instant and risked forgetting how to inhabit it. The second has swallowed the century, and yet, somewhere beyond the glare of the screen, the old clock still ticks, quietly reminding us that not every moment needs to happen now. Chapter 10, The Slow Movement, Reclaiming Time. Somewhere, far from the noise of notifications and the hum of machines, a clock still ticks softly in an old wooden room. Its pendulum sways with patient rhythm, not for profit, not for precision, but for peace. In its gentle motion, one can hear the echo of something humanity has begun to forget, the beauty of slowness. For centuries we raced to master time. Now, for the first time, we are trying to escape it. Of speed. The 21st century has perfected acceleration. We move faster, think faster, consume faster, and yet, we rarely arrive. Each innovation meant to save time seems only to fill it with more demands. Our calendars overflow, our minds hum with urgency, our days blur into a single continuous task. This weariness is not from work alone, it is from tempo. The ceaseless rhythm of modern life has become its own exhaustion. And so, around the world, people have begun to rebel, not with violence or ideology, but with quietness. They are rediscovering an ancient truth, that time, to be meaningful, must sometimes stand still. The birth of the slow movement. The rebellion began, fittingly, with a meal. In 1986, an Italian journalist named Carlo Petrini protested the opening of a McDonald's in Rome's Piazza di Spagna. He argued that the fast food chain represented not progress, but impoverishment, the loss of tradition, taste, and time. In response, he founded the slow food movement, dedicated to savoring meals, preserving regional cuisine, and celebrating the art of waiting. From that humble protest grew something much larger, the slow movement. It spread from kitchens to cities, from design to education. Its philosophy was simple but radical, that life's deepest pleasures, love, creativity, knowledge, community, cannot be rushed. To move slowly was not to reject modernity, but to reclaim control over it. Slowness has resistance. Across the world, slow has become a quiet banner of resistance. Cities now designate slow zones to reduce traffic, noise, and stress. Schools experiment with slow education, allowing children to learn through curiosity rather than competition. Even technology, once the great accelerant, has given rise to digital minimalism, people intentionally disconnecting, choosing presence over pressure. The modern slow movement does not call for abandoning the clock, but for rewriting our relationship with it. It asks, must every hour be filled? Must every moment be measured? Can we live more deeply by living less quickly? The science of stillness. What began as philosophy has gained scientific validation. Neuroscientists now understand that the brain cannot function optimally under perpetual acceleration. When flooded with stimuli, it stops forming memories effectively. Time seems to vanish. In contrast, when we slow down, walking, cooking, listening, meditating, our perception expands. Moments grow richer, the world regains texture. Slowness, paradoxically, makes life feel longer. Studies show that those who cultivate mindfulness or deliberate calm often report greater happiness and fulfillment, not because they do more, but because they notice more, rediscovering the body's clock. The clock on the wall may define the modern schedule, but within each of us beats an older rhythm. Our circadian clock, the internal cycle of light, sleep, and hormone, still follows the sun, no matter how bright our screens. Ignoring it leads to fatigue, anxiety, and disorientation. Honoring it restores harmony. In returning to natural rhythms, waking with sunlight, eating slowly, sleeping deeply, people are not rejecting technology, but aligning it with the body's wisdom. Human time, biological time, cosmic time, all begin to move together again. The economics of For centuries, societies measured success in growth, faster, larger, more. But as economies globalized and digitalized, cracks appeared. The relentless pursuit of productivity led to burnout, inequality, and ecological strain. A new generation began asking, what if progress isn't speed, but balance? This gave rise to slow economics, movements that prioritize sustainability, local craft, and ethical production. Farmers markets, artisanal workshops, community gardens, small acts of resistance to the tyranny of the instant. They remind us that patience creates quality, and time invested gives meaning. Time as sanctuary. Perhaps what we seek most in slowness is sanctuary, a space where the clock's command softens. People now carve small temples of time into their lives, the morning ritual of tea, the evening walk, the hour of silence before bed. In these simple acts, time ceases to chase and begins to breathe. We begin to experience again what the ancients felt beneath open skies, that time is not an enemy, but a companion, that it flows through us, not against us. The new philosophy of enough. In a world obsessed with doing, the hardest thing is to simply be. But perhaps the future of civilization will depend on that rediscovery. The slow movement, mindfulness, minimalism, all are expressions of a deeper yearning to step outside the blur and reclaim the moment as it happens. When the philosopher Seneca wrote, 2,000 years ago, that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it, he could never have imagined smartphones or jet engines, and yet his words remain the same remedy, to measure life not in seconds but in depth. The return to presence. In the quiet rebellion against acceleration, humanity may finally be coming full circle. Once we sought to conquer time, then we sought to measure it. Now we seek to live within it again. The future will still depend on clocks, satellites, and data, but perhaps the truest measure of civilization will not be how fast it moves, but how deeply it listens to the pause between its beats. Because time, at its heart, was never meant to be conquered, only cherished. And somewhere, as midnight passes and another day begins, a clock ticks softly, not as a master, but as a friend, when time sleeps. The story of time is, in the end, the story of us. From the shadows of ancient sundials to the glow of digital screens, humanity has spent millennia chasing the rhythm of the universe, trying to name it, shape it, capture it. We carved calendars into stone, built towers to ring the hour, and split the atom to count the billionth beat of a second. We learned to measure the cosmos, and in doing so, we began to measure our own hearts. Through the centuries, the clock has changed its face. From the whisper of water to the swing of a pendulum, from the tick of iron to the pulse of light, each new invention promised mastery, precision, a deeper understanding. And yet, the closer we came to perfection, the further time slipped through our fingers. We learned to move faster than our ancestors ever dreamed. We crossed oceans, mapped planets, and turned the world into a single, living schedule. But in that motion, we forgot how to pause, the stillness that once shaped meaning. Now, as the hum of technology fills the night, a quieter wisdom begins to return, that not every moment must be productive, that not every silence must be filled, that even in an age of acceleration, peace can be found in the slow turning of the earth and in the simple rhythm of our own breath. Time has always been both master and companion, a current that carries us forward, and a mirror that reflects the passing of all things. But perhaps, after all, we are learning once more to drift with it, to listen rather than control, to live and rather than count. The story of time ends where it began. Beneath the same stars that watched over the first fires, in the same darkness that cradles every dream, the clock still ticks, but softly, like a heartbeat now, in the quiet of the universe. Rest now. The night keeps its own time, and time, tonight, belongs to you. If you are sleeping already, sleep well. If you are listening, may the rest of your night be easy. Subscribe to History for Sleep, and let the next story